Good morning, everyone. My name is Damon Levine, and I'm a facilitator here at Prude, and I want to welcome you to our ongoing Black History Month speaker series. I'd like to introduce you to Prude Director Lee Song to say a few words about today. Lee?
Thank you, Damon. It's been my pleasure to be co-hosting with Damon since yesterday. We had Mr. David Peters, that was our founder of Approved, and it was honored today, yesterday, and it's totally honored today that to be co-hosting this series with Damon. And today's guest, Damon will introduce, and it is I'm really proud to be co-hosting this session for Ralph Thomas. And shall we, pronounce Ralph, the Dr. Ralph Thomas, because it's such pleasure for me have had a chance to work with Ralph on a daily basis and from Approved in the past of 2 years. And of course, before that, I knew Ralph from many years ago, since my first enrollment with cases on racial discrimination, and then things happened among our racialized community. So Ralph was the one always there to help, and then he was there to guide me through managing the organization Prude. I wanted to remind everyone this year is a significant year and for Prude. Now, Prude stands for Pride of Race, Unity, Dignity through Education. The organization was founded in 1981, and this year is our 40 years in services in this community. We always champion for diversity and inclusion. Without further ado, I wanted to give the stage back to Damon, who will be introduce you to today's series. But Ralph Thomas, thank you so much, and for all the work that you contribute and continue to work and to build up the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. So if you've been following us, you know that this is a series of free interactive online talks from presenters from around the province who share stories on many subjects related to both Black history in New Brunswick and the present-day Black community. Now, these talks include subjects ranging from Black loyalists and Black refugees to entrepreneurship, personal uplift, and even poetry reading. Now, during Black History Month, we often hear about Black loyalists and Black refugees. So a little explanation, I think, is in order before I introduce today's guests to talk about St. John's very own Black refugee settlement of Willow Grove. So Black loyalists were the African Americans who escaped slavery in the United States during the American Revolution by fighting for the British or otherwise staying loyal to the Crown. After the British loss, Black loyalists were evacuated to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Now, Black refugees were the second group of African Americans who sought freedom in Canada, roughly from the time of the War of 1812 to the American Civil War. Again, they were evacuated to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia by the British around the time of the War of 1812. And those who came between that time and the American Civil War would have used the Underground Railroad that we've heard a lot about. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a talk by Mr. Joe G in a few weeks about the Underground Railroad, which you definitely don't want to miss. So today's speaker is likely familiar to many of us. Ralph Tiger Thomas is a well-known amateur and professional boxer who has been inducted into several sports Hall of Fames. Over the past 5 decades, he's developed and promoted the sport on an amateur level, both in St. John and throughout the province. So Ralph was the New Brunswick Amateur Association's first president and served 20 years at the helm of that organization. He also served on the board of directors of the Canadian Amateur Boxing Association for 28 years. In addition to these accomplishments, Ralph is also a founding member of both Prude and the New Brunswick Black History Society, where he continues to work on projects that strengthen the bonds of Black community, both within the province and the region. It is my honor to welcome Mr. Ralph Thomas. Ralph?
Thank you, Damon, and thank you, Lee. It's great to be here this morning, and Damon, I'm really honored to be able to work with Lee Song and with you, Damon. And it's just a great time, and it shows that we're moving forward. And I guess we're ready for some exciting times as the month goes on and keeps growing. I've never seen it so busy. Black History Month has really took off this year to a pace that it's hard for us to keep up with, and that's what we have worked for over the years. Lee had just mentioned that it's our 40th year of being involved with Prude, and it's our 11th year with the New Brunswick Black History Society, and all of a sudden, the year 2020 has really blossomed into finding our history, finding our equal rights, and making sure they're being put in place where they should be. And it's just an exciting time, and I'm glad to be part of that, Damon. So, Damon, are you have questions for me now, or do I just carry on and continue?
Hi, Ralph. Yeah, so definitely continue, carry on, because people definitely want to hear what you have to say. And then once you're finished, we'll have questions for you. And we look forward.
Okay, then I'm sorry to delay you folks, and sorry to slow things down a bit, but I'm looking at the picture here now that shows the Willow burial grounds, and the Willow burial grounds are a end result of our Black refugees coming to these parts. The Black refugees settled in the Loch Lomond, Willow Grove area, and the pictures that's up shows you the Black settlement burial grounds and when and what years that it had operated in. And it's 1831 to 1941 that burial ground was active. Now today it's just a memorial of the struggle that folks had, and that struggle was, I realized that everyone had a struggle. I realized that the Irish had a struggle. I realized the French had a struggle when they first came to these parts, and the Loyalists had a struggle. But our folks that came, both Black Loyalists and our refugees that came here, our struggle was a whole lot worse than the folks that came before us. This burial ground that we see that's out in Willow Grove there, it's a spot that we were all given a certain amount of land. In our case, it was 55 acres of land that we were supposed to be able to just come to that area and build it from the start, and it was all ready for us. But we found when we came, it was a barren land. We couldn't grow things on it like we normally could with any other land that you would be given to any other new settlers that came to St. John or to the province of New Brunswick. So it's still today a barren land out there, a barren probably, but it gives you at least an idea what it looked like in 1815 when we were given that property and said, here, make a go of it. And the reason why, it's well explained by Damon in the beginning. It was, we were given the folks that came there, and I'm going to speak about refugees mostly, but when they came, they were end results of, with an agreement with the British. If they fought against the Americans, they would be given their freedom, and they would be given land at which they could toil and which they could build the community. This is an example in Willow Grove area and the Loch Lomond area of what they really had to come to and settle in. And as you look at the background above the ground line, you see all the growth and the trees there. This is what they came to, just plain barren land, and had to start from scratch to get going and to start to build that settlement. And I don't know really how they accomplished that, but I think they accomplished this by the will to succeed, by the faith that they had, and it was just so extreme. I can say that because I was brought up in Willow Grove. I was in Willow Grove since I was 2 years old, and I remained there until I was 18. The saddest part was I had no idea that there was a burial ground about a mile away from where I lived and what the history of it was all about. But living in Willow Grove at that time in the 40s and 50s and part of the 60s, it was a tough go. But number one, because of our ancestors before us, whether they be loyalists, whether they be refugees, they built that community in a way that we had lots to eat. We had a roof over our head. We were warm. We were warm and cozy. We had lots of food. But, you know, it was the same old story. We never had the monies that we would want to. Well, some of us when we were young wanted a new bicycle. Some of the young teenagers would want a new car. The money wasn't available, but we were taught through the struggle that if you wanted something extra, you had to work hard for it. And we started doing the same things that our ancestors did. We either worked for some of the people around us, some of the people already in the community, whether it be with farming, whether it be with housekeeping, we had to go back to town to go to work and then come home at night. And, you know, when we think about the 1800s and 1815 to 1836, when these folks settled on this ground, on this property that I'm talking about here, they had to go, if they worked in the city, they had to get up very, very early in the morning, hitchhike a ride to the city of St. John, which was 16 to 18 miles away in some cases. And then they had to finish work and come back to that property, because if they did not do that and went and stayed in town for a week, they could have come back to the property and found that the squatters had already taken their land that was supposed to have been theirs. So it was a very tough time for those folks. I don't understand how they ever came through those times, but they did. The loyalists, the refugees in particular, the refugees came here as slaves, so they are used to being told every day that when you get up, you're going to be working the fields, or you're going to be working here, or you're going to be working in the house, so you're going to do them. And they didn't have to worry about a roof over their head. They didn't have to worry about getting fed, because they would anyway.
Excuse me, Ralph.
Yes.
Got a question for you. So you mentioned squatters. Now, when you say squatters, do you mean that if people who lived in Willow Grove left their plot of land and went to work in the city, then came back, other families might like take over that plot of land?
Yeah, if they left their property, for example, then for any length of time, like let's say they went to town and for a week they weren't on that property. There was no law, because nothing was signed to say that it was their property until 1836, really.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is
somebody could squat the land. So
this is basically at the time the black refugees came here in the 18 teens, like around 1814, 1815, 1816. From that time until the 1830s, that's what happened with them. Is that correct?
That could happen. How many times it happened that it was squatted is a question mark, of course.
Yeah.
But it could happen. You know, I remember there's a property just up from the burial ground now that first people on the land squatted that land.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fascinating. I actually never knew that. I never knew that part of it. That really sounds like hardship, you know. Hardship. And Ralph, this was around the time when the black refugees came here that there were laws in place in New Brunswick that stated that the black people could not work the water, right? Couldn't work the water, so if we had to work anywhere on our own, it was farming, but the land was not suitable for farming. Is that correct?
Especially in that spot in Willow Grove or Loch Lomond. The land that we were given was 55 acres and maybe 50 in some cases, and it was really tough land where the folks right alongside of them, which would have been white folks at that time, they were given 200 acres, 300 acres, and so on, and land that would grow the vegetables and grow the things that was necessary to build the community.
And Ralph, is it true that blacks were not allowed to work on the water?
Well, that happened mostly in the city. That I understand. It was a law that you couldn't be out after dark, and it was a law that you couldn't fish in the Bay of Fundy or the streams, and that you couldn't organize a business of your own or have a business of your own unless it was okay by a prominent white person.
Right. Exactly. Ralph, I wanted to pose that question for you. I'm going to let you go on, and then we have some more questions for you a little later on.
Very good. Thank you. So you're going to put up the next slide?
I am, yes.
So that slide there tells you folks that it sort of tells you that, yes, we had some hard times, no question. It was harder than the folks that live next door because, I don't know, we seem to have been treated like, well, aliens. You know, it wasn't a friendly environment in the 1800s. We had a tough time. But when you look at things, we have a habit in Prue to tell the story as the stories go. Yes, we had a tough time. Yes, we had it way tougher than we should have had. But don't forget, folks, that there were folks that stepped up and said these folks should be treated like human beings the same as anybody else. So when we're talking about Willow Grove, we remember a person by the name of Edmund Hillier Duval. He was a person that came to these parts from England. He was a supervisor of schools. And when he got in his senior years, he became a pastor, and one of his big accomplishments was the fact that he would go to Willow Grove and talk to the black folks and try and help them get used of the area that they had just come to and try and communicate with the rest of the community. And he did that with his two daughters, and the daughters would have meetings and they would have ideas put together, and then they would go and work with the black folks in that community, and they became more connected with the rest of the community. So you see the stones that are here. You see what Edmund Duval did for the folks in Willow Grove and what the folks said about Edmund Duval. Edmund Duval really is buried at the front of that little building that you see as a marker for where the church that Edmund Duval built for the black folks back in the 1800s. He started it in 1875 and he finished it in 1878, completely paid for. It was one of the big items, as you will read in the book, Blacks in New Brunswick by W.A. Spray. And then you see the next stone that's there will explain to you what we had just talked about a little bit on how the refugees arrived in St. John in 1815, was supposed to have the land to go and settle on right away, but really they didn't settle their land grants until 1836. So what did they do in between that time? We touched a little bit on it. They worked for the farmers in the surrounding areas. They worked for people in general in the surrounding areas. They had to go to town and work in the factories that were built in the city. and then find their way back home at the end of the day and find their way back again early next morning. So those stones tell you the history of Willow Grove pretty well, and also parts of Loch Lomond.
Ralph?
Yes.
I'm loving this. I'm loving the stories and the history, and we have some really great questions coming in for you from our audience.
Okay.
Remind our audience, the chat box. Feel free to put your questions in there. We'll get them to Ralph. We look forward to them. So feel free to type your questions for Ralph in the chat. But we have two questions for you, which are pretty related. So the settlement of Willow Grove was roughly 24 kilometers from the St. John City Center. So was there any sort of dedicated transportation to get people from Willow Grove to St. John back in those days? And second question, which is kind of similar, was there a schoolhouse in Willow Grove for the students?
Yeah, and the first question, getting back and forth was a pretty tough job. It's horse and wagon in the very beginning, of course, and when the motor cars came our way, it was hitchhike back and forth, because most of the settlers didn't. Even my uncle that I grew up with in Willow Grove, they didn't have their own vehicles until late in life, and it was a tough journey. I don't know how they would get from, in our cases, we're calling it by mileage then, it was 16, 17 miles away.
Right.
And they mostly walked half the way or all the way, whatever it took to get to the city, get to work, do their things the best way they could.
Mm-hmm.
Hitchhiking, it would be walking half the way. I mean, I did that, and when I was in my teens and taking part in sports or going back and forth to the city, I found that some nights you'd walk halfway home before, or you might get a ride right 5 or 6 miles away from where you actually live. So it was tough in transportation wise.
So Ralph, and you were growing up in Willow Grove in the 40s and 50s. That's correct, yeah? Okay,
yeah.
And so even then there was no dedicated bus service out Loch Lomond Road to get there.
I'll tell you what was dedicated in the 50s. Starting in the 50s, there was a bus route that would run from St. Martin's to the city of St. John, and then we'd walk down a mile or two or wherever you could link on to the main highway, and you would get on that bus and go. So that bus was the beginning of transportation starting to come to Willow Grove. Well, then, as time went on, even that bus service stopped. So it was still very tough to get back and forth.
Yeah, Ralph, was there a schoolhouse in Willow Grove? How did the black kids get education?
Yeah, there was a schoolhouse in Willow Grove in the 1800s. It was a schoolhouse there. Before that, the early 1800s, there was a log cabin on that very site that you see at the Black Burial Grounds, and
right.
That log cabin was built by some of the refugees that came to those parts, and it was used as a schoolhouse. It was used as a place to go and get business done, and it also was used as a place of worship. And it was a log cabin that was there it says some 14 to 15 years before the church was built there on that site. So there was a school in that area in Willow Grove.
So it was almost like an all-purpose building for the black community at the time. Is that correct?
Well, it was a meeting house that you would call, as they called the early buildings. It was a meeting house for the black folks, a school for the black folks, and a place of them to celebrate or have their meetings and see what they're going to do next in their next move in their community.
Fascinating. I want to thank Kate and Andrew for those questions. I've enjoyed Ralph's answers to those, and I hope you did too. Ralph, Willow Grove at that time was a black community, but we live amongst our neighbors, and we have one of our audience, Dee, has family in Garnet Settlement, and she would like to know what the relationship was like between the Black community in Willow Grove and the whites living in Garnet Settlement. Do you have any insight on that?
In Garnet Settlement, by the time that I realized, it like black folks didn't talk about that corner, that corner where the black burial ground is. They didn't talk about it. So I was probably 13, 14 years old before I realized there was even a burial ground there. And then you're young and you said, so what? But connected with Garnet Settlement. When we went to school with folks from Garnet Settlement. We went to Garnet Settlement to see movies and all this kind of stuff in one of the churches when I was growing up. And the connection between Garnet Settlement and Willow Grove was always excellent. We were always great friends. We always, if we needed help with one another or from one another, it always happened.
Really, that's quite an interesting insight. That's fascinating. Dee, I hope you you got your answer to that. That's a fascinating question.
Yeah,
that's a fascinating answer.
It was wonderful that and I think all that friendship was taught through the Edmund DeVille that we talked about a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Ralph, I'm going to go on to the next slide, Ralph.
Yes, the next slide tells you the struggle, and we touched a bit on the struggle and what the struggle was all about. And yes, other folks had a struggle too, and that's why we made that sign. That sign is made up the struggle, and if you read it up close, it'll explain the struggle in depth. When folks go out to visit that site, they'll get a chance to see, as you see over in the right-hand corner, you will see where the foundation was for the big church that was made to replace that log cabin that we had talked about. That little building that you see there is just a building where we kept all the equipment to keep the grounds up once we decided to look after that burial grounds for our ancestors, to let them know that, hey, we still remember the struggle you had. We still remember the fight that you had so that we could be treated equal. So we kept that property up, and I've been involved with keeping it up along with the David Peters and along with the folks from St. John and the folks from Prude especially. And that is the story. There is the foundation that shows you where the old church was. There's the little building right at the front of the church. There's the flagpole that we're standing beside, and underneath that it says the struggle. It will explain what the gentleman who donated that big cast iron cross that you see on that site now, that cast iron cross was put there for a reason. It was put there as a marker so everybody wouldn't just whiz by. There's the cross, and it shows you exactly why, and I'll tell you exactly why that was there. It's put there by a gentleman by the name of Victor Wojak, and he came to a meeting one time and said, I'd like to donate something to Willow Grove to make sure that we never lose sight of it. We make sure we never get into a victim of it, grows over, nobody knows where it is. And he brought us that example, and we said yes in a hurry. But that tells us about the history, and I'll explain it to you as quick as I can. It shows you, if you look at the left side, it shows Alabama. If you look at the right side, it represents Mississippi. And if you look at the center of the cross where the black is shown there, it's in a lean. It has a lean. It's in a lean. It's showing us how our Savior carried the cross for all of us. So when you look at the sign that says the struggle, it explains what Victor Wojak seen in that vision and why he built that cross that way. And a quick explanation would tell us that the sign on the left is Martin Luther King fighting for civil rights. On the right, it's Martin Luther King fighting for the people who was not being paid equally or not being paid enough to even exist. Those are some of the stories that cross tells you.
Ralph, as a person who grew up in Willow Grove and a person who, when you were growing up in there, knew many of the elders in that community, was there ever any contentious relations with other communities nearby, or were things fairly peaceful amongst the blacks in Willow Grove and the whites in Garnet Settlement and other places? What was your take on that?
When I grew up, speaking from the times that I grew up in Willow Grove, yes, I was blessed with the fact that folks got along well. Yes, there were some things that was said out of color and things like that, and you got that fixed in a hurry, and you just said to them, hey, we don't appreciate what you're saying, and I wish you would never say it again. And if it ever got to the parent, whether it be a white parent or a black parent, that the kid had name called somebody for any reason, both of them or those people would be in a serious world of hurt, because you really, back then, they used the strap or they used the switch or whatever to make sure you remembered you will never say that again. So the community as a whole, when I was growing up from 2 years old to the time I left, which would be 18 years of age, we always got along. If there were a problem and any neighbor had a problem, the first people to come would be your next door neighbor. And like, the story tells it in the book of Blacks in New Brunswick, there were very few black people in that area at that time.
Right.
But we got along great with folks. I mean, whether it be Garnet Settlement, whether it be Willow Grove, whether it be Loch Lomond, we all got along. We never had these name calling in the schools that as time went on, it got worse. But it was never, when I was growing up in my timeline, it was a place of people got along. That was the first thing they tried to do. Now, don't get me wrong. My brother and sister grew up in the city of St. John, and that was a nightmare story compared to Willow Grove.
Mm-hmm. Ralph, thank you for that. And I hope that answers your questions. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll get them to Ralph. Ralph, something positive has happened recently, and I know that you've been working on this for quite a while. Can you tell us about the Canada Post honor for Willow Grove?
Oh yeah, yes, that's really outstanding on the part. A few of us have worked on that stamp for some time. I think the test of the water per se was, we tried starting back. David Peters and I decided a couple of years ago, some of the people in the community as well asked about having a stamp for recognition. And we worked on that for a good solid year and a half on a weekly basis almost. It sounds like a lot of time, but it was. We put things back and forth. What about this? What do you think about this picture? What do you think about that picture? And we ended up deciding that let's put for a change. Now, we have a lot of black firsts. We have our black first lawyer. We had our black first school teachers. We had our first ladies to be able to be in a business. We had a whole lot of firsts go on. But let's not forget the common folks that came to these parts. And their goal was not that I'm going to be the first person to break the ice and go to a different place that they wouldn't allow us to go in the city, or I'm going to be a school teacher or anything. They just came to these parts for their freedom to start out with and to be treated equal. And they fought for that with their lives in some cases. I mean, the story of Willow Grove in the book called Blacks in New Brunswick, you'll read some stories that'll break your heart. You know, people found froze to death. People had to go to the poorhouse more often than they should. All those stories just pulls at the heartstrings. And for us to get a stamp for Willow Grove and to honor your ordinary, common folks that went out there and put their life on the line to build our community, and for us to get a stamp, you don't realize how that feels. You may realize that more than some, because where you come from, Damon, you had people being honored and you had people just another part of the world. But to have a stamp for Willow Grove, for the common folks first, and to show the background of how the ship, as you see the ship sailing in there, called the Regulus, who brought the refugees to these parts and landed at the foot of King Street. And then we were placed across the province. But it started in Willow Grove. And now we have our own stamp. One of the highest honors I feel that we can have for the people who broke ground for us so that we could have a settlement and be able to be free in Loch Lomond and Willow Grove.
It is a great honor. It is a great honor, Ralph. And just a little background to the audience. So Ralph and David worked for quite a while with Canada Post to get a stamp that they've just now issued, which honors the Willow Grove Black refugees. We just had the unveiling of this stamp officially last Friday, and this is a photo from that unveiling. Incidentally, the unveiling was at the New Brunswick Black History Society Heritage Room, which we have in Brunswick Square for Black History Month. I'm just letting you know that. But the photos you see there are Ralph and some other members of the Willow Grove community, as well as the president of the New Brunswick Black History Society. I believe that's Skip. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and let me, if I may, I'd like you starting from the left and moving on to the right. We have Sylvia Seals, like her grandmother or her grandfather, excuse me. Her grandfather is buried at the Willow Grove burial grounds.
Right.
We have Agnes Roach, who is one of the folks that grew up in Willow Grove when I grew up. She was the Leslie at that time, back in the 40s. And strong ladies right there. You have off to the right past Ralph Thomas there, you have Skip Talbot. Skip Talbot was a person that was a Fredericton person, really, but he is a type of individual that came to everything that Prude put on. When Prude used to have Palongo days and Prude had meetings and Prude had events, Skip always came. And he came from the time we started, and he's still coming today, and he's still involved in Black history. And he's the president now. And the gentleman on your far right is Ovid Seals, the husband of Sylvia Seals.
Okay, Ralph, I'm just going to advance.
Yeah.
We had quite a lot of local political leadership at the unveiling too. Can we tell who those people are? I know the woman on the left is representative for Arlene.
Yeah, Arlene Dunn. She works in Arlene Dunn's office. Trevor Holder has always been a strong supporter of Prude. Anytime he talks about Prude or anything, he talks about our organization, and just a blessing. We also have, help me out with the name there. I forgot the name right off the top, and I'm sorry for that. The
Wayne Long.
MP for St. John is
Wayne
Wayne
Long.
Long. Thank you with that. And of course, we have Mayor Don Darlin, and of course, we have Lee Song. Lee is involved with everything connected with Prude and everything connected with the community in general, whether it be the Black History Society or will it be the multicultural side of our business. It's just Lee. And as you know, Lee is a nonstop person in promoting equal opportunities for all people.
Absolutely.
In the city of St. John and the province of Nebraska.
Absolutely. Ralph, two of our audience, our audience members, we have Sue in our audience wants to give you kudos for the work on the stamp. She lives in Willow Grove and says she can't imagine having to come here and clear land, since every time she puts a shovel in the ground, she gets nothing but rocks. So she says, bravo for your work on the stamp.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Sue.
Yeah. Hey, Ralph, question for you, and this is for Linda. Is the stamp available for purchase?
Yes, the stamp's on sale. I heard some things yesterday that surprised me, is that the some of the places that Canada Post have in the city, they're out of the stamp.
Oh, really? They've sold out?
Doesn't sound like the norm. So I'm glad to have that opportunity to let them know that Canada Post, I made a phone call yesterday to Canada Post down on Rossley Avenue about it, and they have stamps down there. But I heard by way of Vine that they don't have it in certain spots.
But we definitely know that the Canada Post main post office on Rossley Avenue does have them.
Yeah, and Shoppers and those places.
Sure.
Usually it's a place for Canada Post. I don't know what they have there, but that's where we should be able to get them.
Okay, well, Linda, I hope that answers your question. Ralph, before we end today, are there any last words you want to say about the settlement, the Black refugee settlement of Willow Grove, and kind of what it means to you? And what it means. Oh, I'm sorry. We have another question too. Forgive me. The importance of teaching about the settlement of Willow Grove. Do you feel that children in the region learn enough about this settlement and Black history in general?
No, I don't. I don't feel that the education side of it is up to par to where it should be. Mm-hmm. Sorry to say that, because as everybody knows, when they know about Prude, that they know that Prude has spent the last 7 or 8 years now, I think it's 8 years now, along with Sherry McCauley and myself and Lee and Mr. Peters and some of the people that connect with the schools now, and I just wanted to get that part clear if I've got the time. The schools at one time would not have anything to do with anything that was connected with racism. They just didn't know how to handle it after we had left. But I must say, as of the last 7 or 8 years, the school now is really reaching out to Prude Inc., saying, can you come and make this presentation about Black history? Can you come and talk to us about racial discrimination? And that last 7 or 8 years has really come on strong. And then, as we mentioned in the beginning about Black Lives Matter, that has really opened the doors to people who were afraid to say anything because of racism, or they were backward in coming up front and saying, do you realize this is happening in my school, or this is happening in my business, and all that. That has come forward. And these are some of the things now that is really coming to light, and somebody's doing something about it. Prude Inc., we have to give credit to, because we've been here for 40 years. And along comes other folks who opens another door, and we can say, yes, for the last 40 years, we experienced some of this. Now we've got the youth coming forward saying, okay, enough of that. Let's do something seriously. And that is a great thing we just see happen. The other side of it is, I guess, I think I've answered that question.
Yes.
Is racism here in the city of St. John? Yes. Is it being corrected as we go step by step? Yes. Because now, more so than ever, Prude is in the forefront. And I mean, it's sad that it took 40 years for them to realize what we were doing. But all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, with the guidance of some of our team that looks after Prude's business, the executive, the staff, and the members have brought things to the forefront far better than before. I mean, when I talk to somebody of the Black community and they say to me, where is Prude, or what is going on? I can't understand that, but that still used to happen back 2 years back. Now, I don't think we're going to have trouble with somebody saying, where's Prude and where's the office and what's going on, under the guidance of the people in the front right now. You got your Lee Songs, you've got your new president, you've got the board of directors, you've got all these folks that are talking Prude, Prude, Prude.
Mm-hmm.
They now know what it's all about. They all know that the fight is still on for equal rights for everybody.
Right.
Black lives matter. All lives matter, Damon. And we've got to understand that part.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Ralph, I like the fact that you've mentioned Black Lives Matter and what those groups are doing here in New Brunswick. I think it dovetails nicely into the work that Prude has been performing over the last 40 years as well. So, Ralph, I want to thank you very much for speaking today about the Willow Grove settlement and Black life in the St. John area in general. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and this was a really enjoyable talk. I hope you enjoyed giving it.
Well, I enjoy every time, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in this city of St. John and connected to the Black community and connected to the community as a whole, mm-hmm. that talks about the Black folks in the Loyalist timelines and the refugees timelines, and up to today that goes to bat. You know, when we seen that march this summer connected to Black Lives Matter, and Prude was there, and all the other organizations was there. And did you see all the folks that turned out? 2,300 to 3,000 people showed up to show that, yes, we're interested in Black people and we're interested in our whole community. We want to make it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a great march too. I was definitely there.
Oh, one of the best.
Well, Ralph, again, we want to thank you for your time, and bear with me one moment. Yeah, I want to thank you for your time, and also I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in to Ralph's talk today. It's been just been a brilliant talk. We've learned so much. I know I've learned so much. I want to remind you that our speaker series is ongoing. It continues next week, and in order to register for more of our speaker series presentations, go to speakerseries.prudeinc.org. Again, that's speakerseries.prudeinc.org. Again, we want to thank Mr. Ralph Thomas for speaking today, and we want to thank you for attending. You have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Ralph.